In unexpected response to 9/11, Chinese netizens seem to have taken a harsh attitude toward the attack's anniversary, even condemning those who mourn for its victims. 3 explosions ripped through a restaurant in the coastal city of Zhuhai. Reports say 3 were injured, but it's unclear if anyone was killed. In an exclusive report, an internal document we obtained details how Chinese authorities were criticized for not destroying classified documents. China is turning to its playbook for economic downturn, building infrastructure. Chinese authorities are calling on the country's local governments to borrow and spend even more in order to boost the economy. That's as they're already suffering from a mounting debt crisis. And a well-known Chinese publisher is detained by Beijing police. Friends say her decision to speak out for Chinese dissidents prompted the arrest. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Today is September 11th. To honor the anniversary, the U.S. Embassy in China posted on Chinese social media on Friday local time. It included part of a statement from President Trump, mourning the victims who died on this day 19 years ago. It read, "This Patriot Day, we commemorate the lives of those who perished on September 11th, 2001. We pray for the families who carry on their legacies, and we honor the unmatched bravery of our nation's first responders. We also commend those who in the days and years following the attack answered the call to serve our country and continue to risk their lives in defense of the matchless blessings of freedom." The post received a huge response from Chinese netizens. Most left comments mocking the U.S., while others defended humanity as a universal value. One of them wrote, "The U.S. is too domineering. When its father is dead, it can mourn him by himself, but it wants all Chinese people to mourn with it." Another commented, "I wish you a September 11th every day." Another netizen responded, "Those cheering Chinese people are garbage. You've lost your qualifications to be a human," meaning to criticize Chinese people who support the West and mourn those who died on 9/11. But amid the onslaught of negative comments, one netizen shared a message of hope. "May the world be peaceful and free from terrorism. Please don't let the mentally handicapped people on Weibo violate the bottom line of basic human morality." Now to southern China. That's where a gas explosion was reported at a restaurant Friday morning in the coastal city of Zhuhai. 2 more explosions followed the blast shortly after. According to local media, at least 3 people were injured. It's unclear if any casualties were suffered. Videos circulating online show thick smoke billowing out from the hotel after the first explosion. Locals were spotted watching the aftermath play out from the street. When the 2 secondary blasts went off, flames erupted from the shattered windows. Some shops and residential buildings nearby were also affected. Police are now investigating the cause. Recently, we obtained an exclusive internal report from the Chinese Inner Mongolia region. It indicates that the communist authorities concealed a lot of information about the CCP virus epidemic across a lot of documents. The report from a CCP inspection group criticized the local authorities for not destroying the classified documents in a timely manner. It was a routine inspection conducted by a Hulun Bir Municipal Party committee between March and May. The report notes the local authorities' failure to carry out higher party committee decisions and includes the following details: insufficient capacity for destroying classified documents, and tons of classified documents were not destroyed on time. The contents of the documents are unknown. It's also questionable how such a huge number of files relating to the virus accumulated in a matter of months. Now we turn to yet another virus cover-up revealed by an internal document we obtained. The document was issued by the Agricultural Market Epidemic Prevention and Control Force in China's Huizhou City. It's located in the southern province of Guangdong. The document says that Chinese Communist Party or CCP virus was detected in a package of frozen chicken wings at a major local market. It's been a month since the contamination was detected, but the information was never revealed to the public. A recent internal document from a local public security bureau reaffirms the cover-up. The document details online pandemic information control, and it specifies to maintain pandemic-related information security and confidentiality. Months after speaking out for dissidents that went missing in China, a prominent Chinese publisher is detained herself. Her friends are now calling for her release. NTD's Juliet Song has the details.
Beijing police detained a prominent publisher along with her husband this Thursday. The publisher is an advocate for dissidents, and her supporters suspect that's what led to her arrest. Her lawyer said authorities charged her with illegal business operations, and that's the only thing he knows so far.
What I want to do the most right now is to see them as soon as possible.
Geng Xiaonan, the publisher, is well known in China's cultural industry. Over the years, she hosted many events for independent artists and scholars. She's also an outspoken advocate for dissidents. After a famous party critic was arrested this July, Geng had been actively calling for his release on social media. She also called for support of citizen journalist Chen Xiushi after he went missing in the middle of covering the epidemic in Wuhan. Geng's friend called her a brave woman.
If prisoners of conscience or outspoken scholars are in trouble, she will speak out for them. She's a courageous, righteous, kind-hearted woman who always knows what's going on.
Her friends are now drawing attention to her arrest on social media, but one of them told NTD that authorities have been trying to silence them. Their social media accounts were shut down.
The authoritarian system in China works just like this. You can't speak the truth. It's like the story of the emperor's new clothes. You can't say the emperor has no clothes on.
Geng's arrest is the latest example of the Chinese regime's effort to crack down on its critics. Also this week, police arrested a family member of a pro-democracy poet. Over 20 police officers took him from his home this June. Later, police also arrested his wife. The poet has 4 children. Up to now, his friends have had no information on his whereabouts. Changchun and Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now we look to other news in the publishing sphere. A new book about the CCP head Xi Jinping will soon be published in China. That's according to Chinese state-run media. The book is said to include many of Xi's speeches and declarations since he took power in 2012. Much of the book reportedly features never-before-seen or published content. Based on inside information, the book also includes one of his speeches from 2019, given during a symposium for teachers about ideological education in schools. In it, he said the purpose of education is to cultivate successors for socialism, and that it's not allowed to produce gravediggers for the communist system. He added that if the education system does create gravediggers for the CCP, it would be considered a failed education. In another speech, this one given in 2014 about socialist ideology, Xi said all universities and colleges must maintain a high degree of consistency with central authorities on major issues. He added it's never permitted to go against the central government. And in 2013, he spoke during China's National Propaganda and Ideological Work Conference. Referring to the West, and especially the U.S., he said hostile forces are there to promote the so-called universal values. He claimed the West's goal is to compete with China for battlefields and people's hearts, and finally to overthrow the CCP's leadership and China's socialist system. Chinese authorities are calling on the country's local governments to borrow and spend even more money. It's an effort to boost a struggling economy, but it comes as China continues to suffer a growing debt crisis.
The last time China went through an economic crisis in 2008, the authorities ordered construction of roads, railways, and bridges to pump up the economy. Since then, local authorities and state-owned companies started frantically borrowing money from banks and the public in order to fund the projects. But the problem is, many of the projects didn't turn out to be profitable, and that created China's ever-mounting debt crisis. In 2017, the International Monetary Fund warned China over its dangerous growth by debt strategy. But according to a former Chinese official, the crisis has only gotten worse. Li Chunliang served as the deputy mayor of China's Jixi and Hegang city in the northeastern province of Heilongjiang. He recently left the mainland and joined overseas pro-democracy groups after realizing the corruption of the Communist Party. He's now wanted by Chinese authorities on charges of corruption. His subordinates have been arrested. Li claims innocence and said the regime is retaliating against him for speaking up.
The entire nation, especially in the northeastern region, at all levels of government are financially broken. They are not just near bankruptcy, but are completely bankrupt.
He said every municipal level city has at least 10 or 20 billion yuan in debt. Larger cities can owe over 100 billion yuan, which equals over $14 billion.
A municipal level city's annual income is about several billion Chinese yuan, 2, 3, or 4 billion. But they have tens of billions of yuan in debt. How are they going to pay for it? Eventually, it all became bad debt.
A Chinese institution estimates the local authorities' debt to be nearly $10 trillion. In 2019, over 800 Chinese local authorities and agencies were listed by courts as being in default, meaning they had failed to make repayments, compared to 100 in 2018. Experts have long worried that the mounting debt could threaten the country's financial system and even disrupt the global economy. Liu said the reason many local officials take huge loans to build infrastructure is to polish their own political records. Large-scale construction can boost the local GDP as well as offer opportunities for corruption in the bidding process.
They did not start from what would benefit the locals. Everything is fake. Everything is for the purpose of political rewards.
That is, projects are not based on whether they are profitable or useful.
Now a lot of the so-called development zones are ghost towns. Nobody is there. Those are all fake development zones or industrial zones.
Such examples abound. The Chinese city of Tianjin borrowed billions of dollars to build what they call China's Manhattan. Yet till today, the district remains a ghost town with barely any commercial activities. And in the southwest province of Guizhou, a poverty-stricken county borrowed $5.7 billion to build a vanity project. The project is now abandoned. The lives of Chinese people are already being affected by the growing debt.
They just don't report it, but the governments are struggling to pay their employees. Many of the benefits for low-income households are now behind in payments. Especially for many of the unemployed, they don't have any basic support.
Meanwhile, the struggling governments also turn to the Chinese People's Pension Fund for rescue, storing up even more trouble for the future.
The pension funds have run out of money. The new workforce are now sustaining the older ones. What does that mean? It means the young people are now paying for the older people's current pension. The young people won't have any when they retire.
And now the Chinese regime is encouraging even more spending on infrastructure in order to boost the economy that is suffering from the pandemic. A Bloomberg report shows that local authorities will need to sell another 1.5 trillion yuan of bonds in 3 months from August. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Now for an update on India-China relations. The countries said on Friday that they've agreed to de-escalate tensions on their contested Himalayan border and take steps to restore peace and tranquility. That's following a high-level diplomatic meeting in Moscow.
India and China are once again trying to defuse the tense military standoff on their mutual border, with Russia as a mediator. Top diplomats from India and China met in Moscow on Friday and said that they'd agreed to disengage their forces in the Himalayas and de-escalate. 20 Indian troops were killed in a clash in June there, and the most recent incident came this week when both countries accused each other of firing into the air, violating a long-held protocol not to use firearms in the area. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said both countries made a useful decision. The Moscow meeting is the latest diplomatic effort to head off a broader conflict between the world's two most populous countries, which went to war in 1962.
Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen visited an air defense missile base on Friday, where she urged the troops to be steadfast in their defense of the island's sovereignty and democracy.
We will never give up even an inch of our land, and we will firmly protect our democracy and our freedoms.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has claimed Taiwan as its own, although it has never ruled the island. This year, the CCP has stepped up its military activity around Taiwan. For 2 days, Chinese forces carried out large-scale air and naval exercises off Taiwan's southwest and in its air defense identification zone. A member of Taiwan's parliament told Taiwanese media outlet United Nations Network that due to the epidemic and international tensions, the Chinese army has been trying to shift the focus of Chinese people by provoking Taiwan. He added Taiwanese people are not afraid of these provocative actions. On the contrary, they will be more opposed to mainland China. Microsoft says foreign countries are increasing cyber attacks targeting the U.S. election. The corporation says its security tools detected and stopped the majority of the attacks.
Microsoft says hackers working for China, Russia, and Iran are targeting the U.S. election and have recently increased their attacks. The firm's vice president of customer security and trust writes, in recent weeks, Microsoft has detected cyber attacks targeting people and organizations involved in the upcoming presidential election, including unsuccessful attacks on people associated with both the Trump and Biden campaigns. Microsoft said Chinese hackers have launched thousands of attacks, successfully compromising about 150 people between March and September. They targeted Democratic nominee Joe Biden's campaign and a person formerly involved with President Trump's administration. Microsoft said a Russian group targeted over 200 organizations, many affiliated with the upcoming U.S. election. The Kremlin dismissed the allegations as nonsense. And Microsoft said Iranian hackers tried to log into the accounts of Trump administration staff and campaign staff. Earlier this year, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report saying China could pose a greater threat than Russia in 2020. The statement said the Chinese regime is trying to shape policy in the United States, pressure political figures opposed to China's interests, and counter criticism of China.
The National Association of Scholars has released a new report. It lays out how the Chinese Communist Party has worked to strategically corrupt the U.S. education system since at least 2003. The author of the report and other scholars give us a deeper look at the problems. They were on a panel discussion with our sister media, the Epoch Times.
While more than 40 Confucius Institutes have already closed, the Chinese Communist Party has worked for more than a decade to burrow its way in to America's K-12 education system and distort the truth about the regime. Rochelle Peterson from the National Association of Scholars explains in her report that it starts with the College Board, which in her words is corrupted by the CCP from the inside out.
And through this network, the College Board encourages school districts to host Chinese government-selected teachers in K-12 classrooms, often in immersion classes in which Chinese teachers teach not only Chinese language, but also social studies, history, and other subjects the CCP takes a special interest in.
Peterson says the College Board is bought off by the CCP and has been for nearly 2 decades. The College Board also worked with the CCP to develop the AP Chinese Language and Culture course, which high school students can take to earn college credit. One professor says a major problem is that the Communist Party eradicates traditional Chinese culture and replaces it with Communist Party-approved narratives.
Whereas in the Cold War, we were very aware that we didn't want Stalinist literature for our students of Russian language. We wanted them to be reading the Russian classics. And for some reason, we think it's okay for literature and textbooks coming out of communist China to be normalized among our student population. So I think that
Gilly emphasized that the enemy is the CCP rather than the Chinese people. He says that the Chinese people are our allies to recovering and preserving the authentic Chinese culture.
We need to develop alternatives, and we need to root out the pernicious influence of the CCP. We cannot let the next generation of Americans be trained by the Chinese Communist Party.
So how can U.S. citizens make an effort to push back against the CCP's encroachment? The scholars suggest a few approaches. Avoid participation in the CCP-backed AP Chinese courses and demand an alternative. support the Athena Act, which calls to withhold taxpayer funds from colleges that have agreements with the CCP. The petition can be found on athena.org/legislation, and the full report from Rochelle Peterson can be found on nas.org. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Now we turn to the tech industry. U.S. President Trump says the September 20th TikTok deadline would not be expanded. That's when the U.S. says the app's parent company, Chinese developer ByteDance, must sell the app by, lest it face a ban in the U.S. TikTok is a popular short video sharing app. It has risen to popularity with young people in the U.S. and other countries outside China since its launch in 2017. In order to meet Trump's deadline, it needs to find a U.S. buyer in the next 10 days. Now we turn to a former Chinese Communist Party insider who dared to criticize Chinese leader Xi Jinping. She's making headlines again by suggesting ways the Communist Party could fall. We sat down with the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu to find out more. Hello, Annie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you back.
Thank you, Tiffany, for having me.
So there's a post that's garnering attention in China by a former professor for the Central Party School of the Chinese Communist Party, Cai Xia. So who is this professor?
Yes, so Cai Xia is a former professor of politics at this party school, which trains young cadres to become party members. And so she's quite powerful and influential within the party system because she has such a high position. So actually recently in June, an audio recording of her speech during a private gathering of party elite leaked online, and people heard her talking about the party and criticizing it, saying that it was at its dead end and that it should be fundamentally abandoned. And she also criticized the leader of the Communist Party himself, Xi Jinping, called him a mafia boss. And so this kind of garnered a lot of attention within the online community in China and also within the party itself. So much so that recently she actually was expelled from the party. The party made an announcement and said that she will no longer be part of the party and she will also have her retirement benefits revoked.
So you mentioned that she was expelled, and after that she wrote a post in which she put forward 3 ways in which she thinks the Chinese Communist Party could fall. So can you expand on those 3 ways?
Sure. So the first point she made was that the Chinese regime's actions could garner such attention from the international community that the entire world unites to fight against the Chinese regime, similar to Hitler during the Nazi Germany or with Gaddafi with the Syrian conflict. And in so doing, the party also itself has its agenda in which the Chinese people could feel united against foreign enemies while people are essentially distracted from the internal problems within the country. And the second proposal that she put out was that the party could potentially reform itself and similar to during the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, there were reforms initiated that could itself bring about the collapse of the party. And the third point she made was that there could be so much internal fighting within the party that all this conflict brings about the collapse of the party itself.
And so going on her second point about internal party reform, how likely is that to succeed?
Yes, so many Chinese people actually hoped that the party would reform and liberalize along with the way its economy has adopted some capital market reforms. But the reality is the party has in fact become increasingly more hardlined in the way it controls many facets of Chinese society. And so people like Cai Xia and other party elites or people who were part of the democracy movement in the 1980s during the Tiananmen Square protests also feel that reform isn't really possible under these circumstances. The party essentially will need to collapse in order for China to welcome democratic reforms.
So Cai Xia is known as what's called a party princeling, as in she comes from a family that was very prominent in the party. And so a lot of people are viewing like her turning her back on the party as an example of her third point. So can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, being that Cai Xia is within the party system, it is very rare for someone of such high stature to so publicly condemn the party. So many China analysts believe that her being so public in her dissent against the party is also evidence of the disagreements within the party and how the future of their ruling can become.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Annie. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.